The road to Carentan and the battle that followed can be vividly understood through the memories of Lieutenant Ronald Speirs, whose experiences offered a perspective different from the one most familiar to audiences through Band of Brothers. During D-Day and the fighting around Carentan, Speirs commanded 2nd Platoon of Dog Company, 2nd Battalion, part of the same regiment as Easy Company. Lieutenant Joseph McMillan had recently assumed command after Captain Jared Gross was killed near Saint-Côme-du-Mont. Speirs remained a platoon leader until much later in the war when Richard Winters selected him to command Easy Company after the battle at Foy. The struggle for Carentan proved costly, leaving hundreds of men from the 101st Airborne Division and supporting armored units dead or wounded. Once a peaceful French town resting beside the Douve River, Carentan had become a shattered landscape of destruction. For 4 years its citizens had endured German occupation waiting for liberation. When that liberation finally approached, it arrived amid an overwhelming storm of naval gunfire, artillery shells, and mortar rounds that pounded the town relentlessly. Buildings burned across the skyline, streets were clogged with rubble, and deep craters scarred the roads. The constant crack of distant gunfire echoed through the ruined community. Only days after landing in Normandy on the 6th of June, the exhausted soldiers of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment were already preparing for another major operation. After fighting their way through miles of hedgerows defended by determined German forces, they reached the outskirts of Carentan. Capturing the town was essential. It would link the Omaha and Utah beachheads and deny the Germans an opportunity to launch a powerful counterattack between the Allied landing zones. At 24 years old, Lieutenant Ronald Speirs was already a figure surrounded by stories. Carrying his Thompson submachine gun and projecting quiet confidence, he had earned a formidable reputation among the men. Tales circulated about actions he had taken on D-Day, and in the days that followed, stories that made him both respected and feared throughout the regiment. On the morning of the 11th of June, Speirs awoke to the sounds of water flowing nearby. Although he had managed a few hours of rest, fatigue hung heavily over the camp. Looking back on the flight to Normandy, the parachute drop, and nearly a week of continuous combat, he remembered that most of the men had enjoyed only a single uninterrupted night of sleep. The strain was obvious. Many were experiencing the harsh realities of combat for the first time, surviving on K-rations that had either been dropped with them or delivered later through resupply efforts. That Sunday, Chaplain John Maloney conducted a religious service for the soldiers. The men prayed, received communion, and briefly found comfort amid the uncertainty of war. Food, toiletries, and fresh supplies were welcomed with enthusiasm. Troopers gathered around news bulletins while journalists searched for stories among the airborne units. Members of the French resistance moved through command posts, sharing valuable intelligence. Captured vehicles and horses were also being collected, and the abundance of horses inspired some soldiers to jokingly call themselves the airborne cavalry. Not everyone was coping equally well with the pressure. Lack of sleep, trembling hands, and signs of emotional strain began to appear among some paratroopers. 19-year-old Art DiMarzio, a member of Speirs' platoon, later recalled that some men handled the stress remarkably well, while others struggled beneath the weight of constant danger. As the 11th of June progressed, Speirs studied Carentan through binoculars from a position northwest of the town. Smoke drifted above the damaged buildings while civilians worked desperately to contain fires and aid their neighbors. At the same time, German defenders were strengthening their positions. Many belonged to the battle-hardened 6th Parachute Regiment and the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, formations with experience fighting in Italy and on the Eastern Front. The Allied objective was clear. General Dwight Eisenhower wanted the Omaha and Utah beachheads connected, and Carentan was the key. The 101st Airborne Division received the mission of capturing the town, while additional Allied forces pressed forward from other directions. Yet the task was far from simple. The day before, elements of the 502nd Regiment had attempted to advance toward Carentan, but encountered fierce resistance. Flooded marshlands, elevated railways, narrow causeways, and well-positioned German strongpoints made every advance costly. Progress stalled and casualties mounted. The terrain itself favored the defenders. Flooded fields prevented flanking maneuvers, leaving attackers exposed. The 506th was therefore assigned a different role. They would move around the western side of the town and secure the higher ground south of Carentan, known as Hill 30. Speirs viewed the mission with concern, He respected the skill and determination of German paratroopers, having already seen their effectiveness at Saint-Côme-du-Mont and Vierville. He also feared the possibility of encountering German armor. Only days earlier, his men had come under fire from an armored vehicle near a bridge, losing one soldier before the Germans withdrew. Late that evening, Colonel Robert Sink gathered his officers to discuss the coming operation. The landscape surrounding Carentan was dominated by marshes, drainage canals, streams, and low-lying terrain. Opportunities for maneuver were limited. Speirs' platoon was already depleted, and he had made the decision to retain only one light machine gun, believing additional riflemen were more useful in the close hedgerow fighting. The available machine guns were also poorly suited for the terrain, relying on tripods rather than more practical bipods. Manpower shortages worried him even more. Since D-Day, more than half of his platoon had become casualties. When Lieutenant Macmillan asked about the platoon's strength, Speirs reported that only 14 men remained. He reflected grimly on the fact that airborne platoons were originally assigned 2 officers because heavy casualties were expected. His own assistant platoon leader had already been wounded. That night the battalion moved out, with dog company positioned near the rear of the column. Horse-drawn carts carried equipment because airborne troops lacked the transport available to conventional infantry units. The carts had to remain behind the marching soldiers to reduce noise. Moving carefully in single file, the paratroopers crossed bridges and waterways outside the town. Ahead, the glow of fires illuminated the horizon, while naval guns continued to bombard Carentan. Silence was essential. Speirs instructed his men to stay close to the soldier in front of them and avoid unnecessary noise. There was little opportunity to maintain proper flank security in the darkness. The column advanced almost blindly, guided more by instinct than sight. Along the route they passed an abandoned farmhouse that had witnessed earlier fighting. At one gate lay the body of a dead paratrooper. Hidden by darkness, nearly every man in the column stepped on him without realizing it until too late. Hours later, the battalion finally reached Hill 30. Speirs deployed his platoon on either side of a road and prepared for the next phase of the battle. Staying awake became the greatest challenge. Exhaustion clouded judgment and increased the risk of mistakes. In one tragic incident, a soldier from another battalion was mistakenly shot after wandering into friendly positions during the night. In the early hours of the 12th of June, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Speirs briefed company commanders on the assault plan. The battalion would attack directly into Carentan and link up with glider troops approaching from another direction. Companies would advance together, clearing German defenders from one street and building after another. The attack was scheduled to begin at dawn. Complications emerged even before the operation started. A command post had been established too far forward, drawing the attention of German snipers who quickly opened fire. Rescue parties had to be dispatched to extract the staff. Meanwhile, terrain restrictions forced the battalion to advance in a column formation, something Speirs considered tactically undesirable but unavoidable under the circumstances. Fox Company led the advance, followed by Easy and Dog companies. As the attack unfolded, Easy Company suffered heavily under intense mortar and machine gun fire. Even so, the airborne troops pressed forward. Richard Winters was wounded early in the fighting when a ricochet struck his leg, yet he continued directing his men. Despite determined resistance, the attackers surged into the town. The battle raged through the streets as soldiers fought house by house. German defenders fired from concealed positions, slowing the advance wherever possible. Gradually, however, Allied forces gained control. Germans attempting to withdraw were caught by machine gun fire, and by mid-morning most organized resistance had collapsed. Speirs was ordered to move Dog Company into the town and establish defensive positions. The destruction he witnessed was staggering. Buildings lay in ruins, streets were littered with debris, and casualties from both sides filled the battlefield. Yet there was little time to rest. Within hours of capturing Carentan, divisional headquarters issued new orders. The 506th was to continue southwest toward additional objectives beyond the town. When Lieutenant Macmillan returned from a battalion meeting carrying the new instructions, even he seemed surprised by the ambition of the plan. Several phase lines had been designated for the advance, but the company's leaders privately doubted they would even reach the first one. Nevertheless, they understood the necessity. If the Germans retained control of the higher ground beyond Carentan, they could launch a devastating counterattack and trap the airborne troops inside the town. The men prepared once again and moved out. As Speirs' platoon advanced from Carentan, German machine guns opened fire from long range. Using short rushes across open ground, the soldiers managed to reach the shelter of a railroad embankment without suffering casualties. Other platoons were not as fortunate. German machine gun crews hidden among the railway positions cut down advancing troops, including lead scouts caught in the open. Speirs and his men hurried forward to provide support, but they too soon found themselves under fire. The struggle for Carentan was not over. Ahead lay another brutal confrontation as German forces gathered for a determined counterattack, setting the stage for the fierce fighting that would soon erupt at Bloody Gulch. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and subscribe. Have a comment about Ronald Speirs at Carentan? Drop your thoughts below. Thanks for watching.